score, the best number to represent all of the scores that are in the tally column, or the frequency of the scores. Example, there are 23 scores that fall between 40 and 44. If we wanted to find a single score that best represented all 23 of those scores, given the assumption of equal distribution, and we do operate from that, what would be the best single score to represent those 23? What score? What's the midpoint between 40 then 42? Right. Right. Okay. So, what would be the midpoint here? 62, 57, 52, 47. Okay, all of those would be your midpoints. Okay. Now, in order to find the central tendency for the entire 100 scores, what we do is let the midpoint represent all of the scores on any given interval. Okay? But remember, we want all of those scores to have some influence, equal influence in terms of what the average is for the entire group. So one of the things that you do is that you multiply the midpoint by the frequency on that interval. So that would be 1 times 62. What's the midpoint here? 57 times 7. All of the scores having the same influence now being represented by the midpoint. Would you make that computation? Just rough, we won't go through the whole thing, but make that computation. 7 times 50, what was it, 57? 49, 399, I think it is, isn't it?
399.
I got one right, huh? My daily made. Okay. 12 times 52. 606.
Now that we've done it, what's the purpose?
What do you do?
I don't even know what you're doing.
Well, let me take you through it just for a moment.
624.
600 and what?
24.
24. Okay. What was that? 300 what?
99.
399. What's the midpoint here?
47.
Times the 17. And we'll stop here. Do that one. Oh, she got a calculator.
799.
Pardon?
799.
799. Okay. Now, the question is, why do you make that kind of a multiplication? If you want to find out, in a sense, the total magnitude, the total contribution that these people have made, the 12, in terms of what their average score is.
Well, we don't care about the 7 on this.
You multiply the frequency. Remember, those scores are unidentified right now. We just don't know what they are. And yet you want to know what the total magnitude of what those people have generated. Okay? Now, hold on just for a moment. Could you do one more for me, Elizabeth? Do this one.
42
Yeah, do the very next one.
times 23. 966.
Okay, 966. Now, what I've got to ask you to kind of pretend with right now, I've got to ask you to, because remember, I don't know literally how many items were on that particular test, but I've always stayed with the notion of 65. Okay? Now, there are 100 scores there. If you wanted to look at the maximum, if everybody had a perfect score, what would the frequency be?
600.
Well, the frequency would be 100. And the score would be 65. Okay, now the 100 information, I'm willing to tolerate that. And take the risk that you're not going to have accidents. You're not going to have accidents. But we know, in fact, that the accidents occur. And what they do then is that they go through and tabulate how many people at the the 55 to 59 level, and they can analyze that and say these people have X number of accidents. They have X number of accidents. And they can go down to the 52, and they'll say these people have X number of accidents. Well, in that kind of a setting, it's critical, because it saves money or costs money to put the accident, of course. But if they could find out, and that's what I'm, in a sense, that's what I am leading, not in a sense, that's what I am leading up to. If we know how far away we are as a class of students from having perfect understanding. Now, it doesn't say what items we haven't accomplished or achieved, attained. It doesn't identify that. Now, later on when we get into test construction, that will be revealed. The only thing I'm doing right now is saying that one of the things that you and I as teachers have to know when we give tests like this is how far we're away from the perfect knowledge. Now, not the perfect knowledge of this single student. Now, I have to go back now to the morning when you were writing those objectives, except for, I think, this table. It was so easy to say all third grade students will gather, make the chart or whatever it might be. All sixth grade students will do that language bit and all that neat spelling and the punctuation and all that kind of stuff. All fifth graders or sixth graders in terms of showing the respect of, picking things up, or the dependability, I guess it was. It's so easy for us to do that, and in a sense what we're saying, I don't mean it. All I'm saying is that one of the ways you can confront yourself as a classroom teacher is to find out how, I'm going to use the word badly, but I don't mean to, how far away you are from a perfect score. And the only thing that this process, and if you added it up, no, it will not come out to the 6,500. It would come out to the 6,500 only if 100% of them got all of them correct. And what this column will do will show, page 3 now on that document 2, it'll show amount of discrepancy. You know what document I'm talking about. How do I know? I know it's a discrepancy. Is it a deficiency? How do I know? Well, one of the ways that you can know is to find out how far away your class is from what you set up as a goal. Let me press table number 1 over here. I won't press flesh, but I'll press it anyway. Would you be satisfied when you said punctuation, handwriting, spelling, and subject-verb correspondence? Would you be satisfied with 80% accuracy? Not asking you that right now, but that's a decision that you're going to have to make sometime in your life. You're going to say, what tolerance will I expect? When table 4 asked them to identify maybe from pictures the different berries and the roots and the forestation and all that kind of stuff, one of the things that you have to say to yourself, what am I going to tolerate as a class now?
Thank you. These medallions? I did for the Amish Head Start. Remember that day when Judy was grieving us? Remember I was asking her to take over the language. This would have been hard, see, to get this. I'm checking these out to Mrs. Jackson. Well, she asked me to. I don't know if I get to though. I think I could. Today? Yeah. Oh. It's probably freezing right now.
That's it.
Okay, would you introduce yourself and tell us what your position is and what you're doing here this evening?
My name is Joe Aralde. I teach second graders, first, second, and third graders in what is called the YES program here at Lincoln School in Toppenish, Washington. YES is the code names, I guess you'd have to call it, for the Yakima English and Spanish trilingual program designed by Ralph McEwen several years ago. I work, as I said, mostly with the second grade. They're my homeroom class. This is the Math Center. The YES program here at Lincoln has an art center, a language center, and a reading center. The children move from one center to another, and they are instructed in that particular center on the topic of the center, such as Math Center. They would study math. Science is also taught here. To the second graders, who are my homeroom students, I also teach spelling, music to all three classes, by the way, social science, health. Have I forgotten anything? All the topics that are not taught in the other centers. The greatest emphasis, of course, is on math. I spend an hour with the second graders. The second graders have an hour slot. First graders have, I believe, a 45-minute slot, as well as the third graders. So the majority of the day then is spent with math When the second graders are here, I spend a lot of time with spelling too. This is the second grade is the first year that children are involved in spelling, so we have quite an involved program in spelling, which I'll talk about in just a minute. I'll show some of the materials that we're working on. Penmanship, of course, along with spelling. We work on that. I have some material about that. I want to go on now to the new program. Topnish has taken on the Scott Forsman program called Math Around Us, and I'm using it in all 3 grades. I have samples of the material here. Each child is issued a text, and along with that, his text is supplemented with ditto materials. And then for example, for the advanced or accelerated student, we have accelerated materials. Each child is first of all placed at the level that he tests out at. He's given placement tests, and where he's able to meet the criteria, I believe, of about 80% accuracy. Let's assume that he understands that much material, then he goes on to the next level. Along with the materials that the children have, I make an effort to keep track. Record keeping is very important. The accountability thing this year is very much in vogue, and it's I think a good thing. It's very time consuming. It takes a lot of time to keep these records, but good records are kept, and I think maybe I can just give you an idea of how records are kept. The Scott Forsman Company provides the record keeping books. We teach math to the children in order to attain certain objectives. The objectives are dictated here by Scott Forsman, and we test these children after having taught these to these objectives to see whether they've attained them or not. Assuming if they attain the objectives, then they go on to the next level. If not, then I use another chart here called a flow chart, which indicates areas that the child should go to. If they haven't attained the certain objective, then sort of rerouting back over the same objectives with different material. The idea is to see if they can possibly learn it a second time.
Is that chart also furnished by Scott Forsman?
Yes, everything that I have here is furnished by Scott Forsman. One of the advantages to the program that I work with is that there's money available to buy all these materials. The district itself didn't provide all of it at the beginning. So they provided the basic tests, textbooks, and also the testing material, but didn't feel they could afford to buy all the other supplementary. By the way, if you have anything to add, just feel free. All right, well, I'm going to move right on. The music program, I once a week bring my accordion to school, and we have a popular type program. I use many of the current tunes that are popular. I'm going to get in more to using some of the old American folklore too, and some Spanish folklore in the music program this year. I think that the children should be exposed to more of that, more than I've had in the past. More than films about animals, films about Earth, films about ecology. We extend through discussion after the films. We talk about what we've seen in the films. We do some reading in science, some reading out of textbooks. And that more or less covers the science part of it. The health, we've reading textbooks, which we use. Also, we've participated. The kids have participated in some projects, such as one involving the senses. That we made a bulletin board for the hallway early this fall on the 5 senses. The record-keeping system, and once more in review, the only problem that it creates is that it's so time-consuming. Correcting all these test papers, well, that's part of your job. But then to correctly document all this, it's taken on. It's become quite a task when you have 30+ students in your classroom. Fortunately, a part of this program, I have 3 planning periods a week in which I can use for record keeping. That
What's the midpoint here? 57 times 7. All of the scores having the same influence now being represented by the midpoint. Would you make that computation? Just rough, we won't go through the whole thing, but make that computation. 7 times 50, what was it, 57? 49, 399, I think it is, isn't it?
399.
I got one right, huh? We do operate from that. What would be the best single score to represent those 23? What score? What's the midpoint between 40 then 42? Right. Right. Okay. So, what would be the midpoint here? 62, 57, 52, 47. Okay, all of those would be your midpoints. Okay. Now, in order to find the central tendency for the entire 100 scores, what we do is let the midpoint represent all of the scores on any given interval. Okay? But remember, we want all of those scores to have some influence, equal influence in terms of what the average is for the entire group. So one of the things that you do is that you multiply the midpoint by the frequency on that interval. So that would be 1 times 6. Score, the best number to represent all of the scores that are in the tally column, or the frequency of the scores. Example, there are 23 scores that fall between 40 and 44. If we wanted to find a single score that best represented all 23 of those scores, given the assumption of equal distribution. And there's many. Okay. 12 times 52. 606.
Now that we've done it, what's the purpose?
Yeah.
What do you do?
I don't get know what you're doing.
Well, let me take you through it just for a moment.
624.
600 and what?
24.
24. Okay. What was that? 300 and what?
399.
99.
399. What's mid?